talk all day long.
Well, hey, everybody, it is Lisa from True North Homeschool Academy, and I'm here once again with one of my daughters, Kendra Vittioe. So, hey, Kendra. So we're doing a cross-country Zoom meeting. I love it. I did a couple of podcasts on when your homeschool gets derailed about our house fire and some of the crazy things that happened that year. We had some really significant family deaths, and it was a really crazy couple months. Many months. And we had, a couple years. We had a lot of downloads on that. And I asked Kendra if she would be willing to do another podcast with me about a traumatic event that happened in her life when she was 14 and how we homeschooled through that and kind of what that meant for her. So Kendra, thanks for joining me again. So glad you're here. Do you want to just jump into the story or do you want me to?
It froze.
I know you froze. Okay. So, yeah, that was a great segue into this whole thing. When homeschooling gets derailed, right there,
It freezes.
Time
itself stops.
It freezes. Okay, I'm going to set the scene, and then you can jump in to kind of tell about it. But so after we moved to South Dakota, I was in a master's program to get my marriage and family therapy degree, and we had gone to some friend's house in the morning, that we'd been in a co-op with all year, and we had a great time. Everybody was out playing, and we got in the car. You guys, my oldest daughter was driving. You were in the passenger seat in the front of the van. Our other 3 kids were in the back of the van, and then we had a friend with them because he was going to go to our house and fish. And you guys dropped me off at the seminary where I was taking classes, and you started driving home. And then on the way home, you were T-boned by a big truck.
Pickup truck, yeah.
A big truck.
I think our truck might be a little bit bigger than that one was, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, the truck that you have now, but it was like a V8 engine, and you guys were in a minivan, and you were in the passenger side in the front seat. And what happened was the seat belt popped out, and that screw scalped you and the front part of your brain.
The seatbelt cover, you have your plastic cover with the seatbelt, and there's a bolt underneath of it to hold it all together. That plastic part popped off. Yeah.
Right. And it basically scalped your skull. And so you were in bad shape. And you had no parents with you. So our oldest was driving, you were 14, all the other kids were younger, and we had a guest in the van, and the sliding door of the van got ripped off and thrown. You guys were spun around, and you ended up in a parking lot. And immediately people called the police, the ambulance came, but the police stayed there with our 2 little kids, and you were medevac by helicopter, obviously, because you were bleeding from your skull, and the car was spinning, so there was blood everywhere. But they also took by ambulance our oldest daughter and our 3rd kiddo. Yeah, so 3 of you went to the hospital, 1 by helicopter, 2 by ambulance, and our 2 younger kids were there on the scene of the accident. My husband came, we were in the same building at the time, and he came up I was actually doing therapy with clients. He knocked on the door, and I immediately knew something was wrong. Stepped out into the hallway, and he said, there's been an accident, and they had to helicopter one of the kids. And I said, who was it? And he said, I don't know. And I said, are they alive? And he said, I also don't know. And he said, someone's going to drive you to the hospital, and I'm going to go to the scene of the accident and pick up the little kids. And so his coworker drove me to the hospital, which was like a miracle we got there without being killed ourselves, because she was so flipped out. I mean, it was
woman, but
yeah, nobody knew what had happened. Nobody knew if we still had 5 kids. I told you I was going to try not to cry during this one.
Okay. Tears are very healing.
It's been a while. I mean, it's been over half your lifetime ago, but I will say as a parent, it was one of the hardest afternoons of my life.
A parent should never have to bury a child or feel as if they have to bury a child.
Yeah.
That's probably the ultimate test, in my opinion, as being a parent.
Yeah. So we got to the hospital, and I went in alone. And I went to the desk and I said, one of my kiddos is here. And they said, go to that little room. I thankfully had no idea that that little room is where they go send you to have a talk with the chaplain about your kid dying. And I wasn't allowed to see you. So I went to the little room and waited, and then they finally let me in to see you. And you had a turban wrapped around your head, and you had blood everywhere, and you were awake. You were not dead, thank God.
I was very awake.
You were very awake. The thing that really scared me when I looked at you was that your eyes were completely red.
Yeah.
Like they weren't just red bloodshot, they were
internal bleeding.
Like you had a brain bleeding. And I looked at you and held your hand and you said, Mommy, why are you crying? And that
I remember that vividly. And the nurse goes,
that whatever I was.
I was water where the nurse goes, are you okay? Are you okay? I'm not okay.
I was totally undone at that point. And but thankfully I was allowed to stay with you for a few more minutes, and then they were going to sedate you.
Well, the nurse and I believe the surgeon actually came out and prayed with all of us together, because he prayed over every single one of his patients. I don't know if you remember that as well, but the nurse said, well, we'll pray with her. And I think he offered to pray with you as well. And you were, as every mother would be, sobbing.
Well, they asked me to go back to the little room. And by that point, our pastor and some friends had come, and my husband had come, and the neurosurgeon came in and said that part of your scalp you had been scalped, literally. Part of your skull had been ripped away from the rest of your skull, and they needed to remove it because it wasn't sterile anymore, and you had glass literally on your brain. So they had to vacuum your brain, which is a weird thing to say at this point.
It is fun to mess with people. Well, my brain's been vacuumed, but I
know, right?
Broke a bone beyond that.
What's one thing you've done no one else has done?
Have my brain vacuumed. This is why I love cleanliness so much.
And for like a year later, you were literally like, you'd have an itch, and all of a sudden you have a piece of glass in your hand. All over
here, all over this side,
over the side of your head. And so they took you into surgery, and I got to walk up with you, and the nurse said, don't worry. It was actually this beautiful hospital that is a Christian hospital. The nurse said, we pray over the operating room. We pray over every patient. She is going to be okay. And that was from the first time I got the news to her saying that was when I finally felt like it is going to be okay. Like I felt really, really peaceful at that point. And you went in and had surgery, and we had so many people come that night from work, from church, from the homeschool co-ops, that and had anointed you with oil. I think you might have broken out in a little cross on your forehead. But the doctors were surprised that you didn't have very much swelling. They let you go after a day and a half. I was like, no. She's not ready to come home. She had this major frontal lobe head injury. But they let you come home, and then we continued homeschooling. And so you were 14. It was the spring of, were you 14 yet, or were you still 13?
It was 2005. I was 14. I was going to be 15 in a month.
Okay.
A month and 2 days.
You're tall too. And so everybody thought you were an adult, and you were.
They're like, you're 18, right? No, it's my, they're like, oh my gosh, you have head injury. I'm like, my birthday's August 29th, 1990. I'm 5'7" or 5'8", and I'm not pregnant.
Right. But you were tall. Everybody thought you were an adult woman, and you kept saying you wanted your daddy, and they were like,
Mommy,
oh gosh, she's got brain damage. No, she's a child.
A kid.
Come get some kids. And then the next day, this is kind of funny. I think it was actually the next day, they came in and asked you what grade you were in, and you were like, I don't even know. And the doctor was like, oh man, she's got brain damage. And the nurse just looks at me and she goes, I think she's homeschooled.
It's like, yeah, I'm homeschooled. We don't go by grade. We go by mastery. Hello.
Yeah. So that was like a big deal. It was not a little deal. We went to look at the van afterwards, and it was there. The fact that you got out of that car and walked was a miracle. The whole front part of that side where you were sitting was smashed into the middle console. I don't know. They had to use the jaws of life to get the door off. The sliding glass door was gone. All the windows were shattered. The fact that everybody came home after that, literally, is nothing short of miraculous. And you were okay. I mean, that was the thing. Like
I've been needing to tell you about this twitch.
But that Thanksgiving, I just remember going, we could be one person less at this table. It was such a great gift that God allowed your life to be spared in that accident. And I think that really changed some things as we homeschool. Did you feel like it did, or did you notice things?
I remember really noticing how people treated me a lot. Like, I remember talking to Dad. We watched Return to Me. That was one of my favorite movies after that. And I watched that one over and over. And there's a part she goes, people treat me like I'm broken. Like, that was, I felt very big. Either people treated me like I was broken, or I would get, when you do co-op, I would get ignored a lot, especially after the accident. And they'd be like, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you were just in a car accident. And I was like, I don't think you understand how stubborn and hard-headed I am. Like try me. Like, the nurse said walk, and I walked to the toilet literally hours after the accident. I mean, that's just probably not safe, and it's given my dad a few heart attacks as I've gotten older. But I mean, you're going to say something. I'm just a determined person.
Well, I think it did, like, to me, that's why I was like, I didn't want them to send you home when they did, because you had bruises over your entire body.
Yeah.
And they kept taking you back for x-ray for your arm and for your leg, and there was nothing broken.
Yep.
But you were bruised pretty significantly. Plus, you had this major trauma to your head, and they had to remove part of your skull. Now, the odd thing about that is they were like, this is the best place to have this kind of injury, because the muscles are so thick here that it's actually thicker than other parts of your skull. So if we had to choose, this is the spot.
Ideal location.
But it did just feel like you were so fragile. And that first night you had been discharged, we were still in a hotel close to the hospital. And it was like, Kendra gets the bed, everybody else was on the floor. Because
I remember Derek going, I was hospital too.
I'm
tired.
Well, I was just so worried someone's going to hit you or kick you, or you were so fragile. And the other kids were too. I wanted
on the blade of a knife.
It was like, everybody was just,
like emotionally, physically, mentally, psychologically, everyone was, that was the max.
Yeah. And just a word about seatbelts. So our friend who was in the car, he was in the second seat in the van with his tackle box, and the car door the sliding door on the van got ripped off. His tackle box was found 150 feet from the car. Everyone in the car had seatbelts on. And if they hadn't, they would be dead, or they would be maimed or damaged beyond belief, because that car spun and was spinning, and it was crazy.
The truck that hit us slid. He couldn't stop. It was, there were tire tracks in the road. There was no sudden stopping. So once you're ejected out of that seat, what a lot of people don't realize, I'm married to someone who works in automotive.
Yeah.
A lot of times those deaths, if you're not killed on contact with the concrete, you're hit by somebody else. So it's just, or you hit something. That's something to keep in mind. Like, obviously husband's in automotive, so we always do seatbelts, and we'll always.
Yeah. So even though it was the seatbelt that was the damage to your head, however, if you hadn't been strapped in,
I would have been brain damage and flung from the car.
Right, exactly. It would have been even worse than it was. So I think and the other thing too, you had gone to a youth group that year after the accident, and you were playing ultimate frisbee in the auditorium with like 100 other kids
outside. Yeah.
And the frisbee hit you in the head.
Yep. It was outside.
Only you. And I mean, it was terrifying. Like, I stayed in the room that night. Yeah. And so I think there was this sense of, to me, you were fragile. Like, I felt super protective of you. And I'm pretty tall too, but you're a little bit taller than I am.
I
But
can't hide behind you.
you cannot hide behind me, honey. But I did feel like nobody touched my girl because you needed to heal. Like I wanted you to be like safe and cared for and nobody mess with you.
Don't
Because
look at her, don't touch her, don't talk to her.
yeah, because there
really,
was that sense
but
of life was so fragile.
yeah.
And it really shook all of us because we could have been burying people after that. We could have buried everybody. And we could have certainly buried you. And so I'm so thankful for modern medicine and the helicopter and for brain vacuums and all the things and for antibiotics, because that was a secondary concern, is that if they could close and contain the injury, that your brain would become infected. And so
Yep.
that was also a big concern. But
And for glue, because as it swells, that glue actually expands and contracts, whereas with stitches up there, it can cause internal re-bleeding and re-injury, essentially.
Right. So modern medicine clearly saved your life, and I'm so grateful. We're a pretty crunchy family, and we're all about vitamins and dynamic greens and all the things, but modern medicine saves lives. That's just the bottom line. So I do think that's interesting that you said you felt like people treated you differently, because I certainly viewed you differently. Like, okay, everybody stand back.
Wait. Yeah.
I didn't realize that you felt that way. So that's interesting. And it just felt like I didn't really want to push you with school too much either. I just felt like you just take a year or two and just
I remember you saying that, and I went to the porch and I'm so bored.
Really?
And that's what's wrong. I'm like, I differently. Mom will let me do school. I'm going on a walk by myself to the river.
I did not get that. See, I was trying to.
I was like, go breathe, go pray.
I was trying to like just give you space to get, and I didn't know that you felt so bored. That's
but I mean, as a girl too, like, and not to get too much, I had started my cycle not too long before that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of, I mean, even the doctor was saying, if I don't know if you remember, but he goes, well, you're 5'7.5". You probably won't grow anymore after this, because your body's going to take all of its energy to heal, you know, and I'm like, and I grew 1.5 inches more, and now I can't find jeans that fit.
Yeah.
But, that just, those hormones on top of all that, I don't think a lot of people don't think about that, because you're thinking about the head injury.
Right. But you still grew a couple inches. I didn't remember that. So yeah, we were in the midst of, okay, so you felt a little bored. That's interesting. And we were really an interactive homeschool family. Like, we did a lot of read alouds together. We always did a morning time together, not necessarily morning basket, but in effect, it was like we did memory work or Bible reading or whatever, pretty much
community homeschooling for sure.
Yeah. And then people had their own subjects, but it felt like I just didn't want you to feel like overwhelmed with academics. And so maybe I should have checked in with you a little bit better on that.
That's understandable though. There was a lot going on.
There was a lot. And we had a big family. We had 7 people living in the house at that time. So we had kids from preschooler to getting ready for college, all in every stage and age. And it
was summer too. So I mean, it's not like we would just jump right back in, there's a lot of take into consideration.
I think that was during the time when we were still doing like our really big garden. And so we would often go outside and garden together, and one of us would read while the rest of us weeded and stuff like that. We had a couple kids who really loved that time, and one in particular who hated doing the gardening thing, and he still doesn't really enjoy it. So that was always interesting. Ethan just really can't stand to get his hands that dirty.
He's saying I should get him plants for his birthday.
He likes plants. He just doesn't
air plants,
gardening.
Air plants and dirtless plants.
Dirtless plants. There you go. That's actually funny. I might do that.
Get the air plants and stick them in seashells, kind of thing.
I know, we actually did that. They're really beautiful. So was there anything else that really stood out to you after that accident for the next year or two? Or did you feel like you had fallout past that? Or, I mean, this was like a serious traumatic head injury to your frontal lobe. You've always been a really organized person. Like you have gifts. You're a little bossy too. So I used to always say you had gifts of administration, which you really is really true.
You need something organized or bossed around, pick me.
You're the girl, but you
Yeah.
really do organize and manage super well. I used to always call you my external brain, and then you left. So my hair and things just
Well,
went awry after that. But yeah, but I don't think I didn't really see anything in you that was like, okay, you're not able to organize or manage anymore. You were still yourself.
yeah.
Although we've had other family members who said that they really noticed a striking personality change with you after the accident and before. And I never felt that. Did you sense that about
I
yourself?
think I remember grandparents especially saying, I don't smile anymore.
Oh,
And how quiet I am. Speak up, speak louder.
oh,
And I was actually talking with Tony about this not long ago, because I have other health things that I have I manage pretty well, but they're all kind of interconnected so that
yeah.
like once you're in an accident like that, you kind of have lifelong,
Yeah.
or you're like, oh, this is why my body reacted that way, or stuff like that. But I feel like I became much more reserved after that. I saw a lot of interfamily turmoil happen during that time. And I think some sibling dynamics came to a head. Really with me and some other people in particular at that was kind of a crossroads with some relationships. Mm-hmm. And I think I really like, I sound like a crazy person saying it. I'm a little bit of a nutcase. Like, I listen to the crows outside kind of thing. That's how much of a nutcase. So that being said, before we had the car accident, I very clearly, I'm starting to lose my voice up at too, so sorry. When we were driving, I started for no reason becoming very scared and fearful of cars. We're in rural South Dakota, so there's no reason for that. Scared of passing another car that's minorly ridiculous. There's like one car every 5,000 feet kind of thing. Yeah. And I remember one of those points I heard internally, like no one else heard it. I'll never leave you nor forsake you, which is Hebrews 13:5. And I was actually talking to a friend, like I've been really fearful, and she actually said the same verse. And I'm kind of still friends with her. She said, you really should look up Hebrews 13:5. I really feel it's your life verse for this season. Mm-hmm. Really just cling to that. And I remember in the car accident, I thought I was dying at one point. Like I heard Rachel screaming in the background and someone else scream. I'm sorry for saying names. And saying my name. And I remember floating upward. And I remember very distinctly, I get kind of emotional about it because this just, as a person of faith, you cling on to certain things. And I remember God saying, I've got you. Like, you'll be okay. I'm holding you in my hand. I'll never leave you and I'll never forsake you. You just got to keep your eyes on me. And man, now you got me crying. Part of it, we're in kind of an interesting time in life, so just really holding on to that. Like, it doesn't matter the noise outside of that, whatever the chaos, the noise that's going on, what other people believe, that's not relevant. All that falls away at the end of the day. God has you in your hands. He's not going to let go of you when you cling on to him. He can pull you out of that chasm if you hold on to him, even if it means, you feel like you're going to rip his shirt off kind of thing. And he goes, but you're not done yet. And I remember being sat back down in the seat. And then I woke up and Rachel goes, I thought you were dead. And I said, I'm fine. Are you okay? And she goes, I don't know. And then she kind of blacked out. And
yeah.
And I remember
she probably got hit pretty hard too, because
she had at least the wind knocked out of her. At the very least. I mean, the car was spinning at like, I think Tony did the math and he said like 45 to 50 miles an hour when he did the math of it, because of the speed of the truck and the speed that the van was going, trying to get out of the way of this truck. And that's a lot of speed. You're going to whack a few times. Right. And then your seat belts, when they pull, you actually do get some internal bruising.
Right.
Typically not enough to cause internal bleeding. That's why seat belts are safer. But I remember too, like, and I was never scared for myself. I knew, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, so pull me back down if you need to.
No, you're not rambling at all. I mean, I think you weren't scared for yourself. One of the things you told me was that you kept checking on everybody else.
I did.
Are they okay? Are they okay?
They're not. And I remember getting in a fight actually when I was in the ambulance. The ambulance. The EMTs from the ambulance helped me. Obviously, they cut my seatbelt off, and then Jaws of Life me out. Which, if you have a child, just a little, FYI, if you have a child that has that kind of experience at a young age, if they hear that sound, the Jaws of Life, or an airplane or an ambulance again, check in on them, because I remember we watched the one movie about the little girl who lost her arm to the shark.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I cannot remember.
I'm blanking on it.
I am too.
But I know exactly which one you mean.
And they do the Jaws of Life scene, and I remember watching that movie and I couldn't breathe. Like, really? Dad goes, breathe.
Well, I do remember being in the car with you. Yeah. Every time we'd go back by that corner, you literally would go, yeah. 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 Okay. So that's a good point. Like, there's muscle memory, and I mean, it's not, if you've had a traumatic event, and one of the things we talked about is I'd had a traumatic life-threatening event at 14 as well, kind of the same time frame. We both have August birthdays, and it's just interesting to me when you have a deep trauma and you have a PTSD, like, in the DSM, and you have dreams and all that kind of stuff. When you experience something that's like a sound or something that reminds you of it, you're going to probably have some kind of trauma response. Yeah. So if you have kids in a traumatic experience kind of thing, check in on them.
Be aware of that. Check in. Remind them to breathe. Inhale, exhale. You're not touch their hands. That's a big thing. Like, I really cling to my dogs, because not as much now, but we've had house fire and death, and my lab especially, she's kind of funny. She'll come up and she'll stick her head on me like, okay, you need to pay attention back into reality. Like,
right. Well, animals are good. Pets are really good for that.
They are.
Okay. So, and the other thing too, so all of our kids were in different places. After the accident, our oldest son, our third kiddo, got out of the car, unbuckled our Hannah and Ethan and our friend, and they actually held hands in a circle and prayed over everybody. And that was really sweet. Like, our kids immediately went to prayer, which really made me so happy that when you feel like you're out of control and there's nothing you can do, you can always pray. You can always pray. And God is faithful to hear and answer our prayers. But it sounds like you were having a conversation with them during that time.
A little bit. Right? I think so.
I hadn't heard that whole piece of the story yet. So that's really touching. And I'm glad we had a few more years with you, because
you've got lots of grandbabies now.
Well, there's, your kids are your biggest gift in life after salvation, and a spouse that loves the Lord, and to have a thought that you might lose them is a horrible thought. I mean, and we can't live in fear, but it's a pain we don't want.
No.
So okay, so I'm not really sure, like, I don't know that we have like a really great point for people who are listening, other than to say, I don't want to diminish what we're saying at all, because I think it's an important story that needs to be told, that no matter what you're doing in life, but especially if you're homeschooling, things are going to happen. Trauma comes, and you don't really have control of it. You might not know when it's going to happen, but God is in the midst of it, and people get through it. I mean, you graduated from high school, you went on to cosmetology school, you were the #1 salesperson at your school month after month after month after month, and are married, happily married, and have 2 beautiful little kids and a whole bunch of animals.
They keep coming. I'm like, please, God, stop.
They keep coming.
Or Joey, if you're a Friends fan, why, God, why?
It's interesting.
It goes, here's one more.
I don't have people giving me animals. Funny how that works.
They just find the house. I was not kidding. Well, I think too, it's about that. We talked about this in another podcast, YouTube, it's about being lenient too. I mean, what are your kids' needs? It's a big bonus of homeschooling. Like, what is your need as a parent? That's very traumatic to you as a mother, as a father, a brother or sister. What is your child need, or what do you need as the child being homeschooled? Mm-hmm. And I think too, one thing that, you and Dad have really instilled in us, and I remember Dad saying all the time, communication. Are you communicating? Communicate, but you're not communicating.
Yeah.
Girl, but that communication is very, very important for everybody. And as a parent, that's your responsibility, but it's also a gift, that gift of communicating. And as a child, that's their responsibility, but that's also a huge gift. Like, well, I don't feel good today. I have a headache today. I need to go on that walk by myself and not feel like I have someone holding my hand all the time. Right. Our horse Bree was a huge, I blogged about him actually. Our horse Bree that we got not a couple years after that, a year and a half after that, not terribly long. He really, and I guess this goes to the whole dog thing, but like, I felt played a huge part in my confidence too. Like when you're in an accident like that, your confidence really kind of gets kicked in the gut.
Yeah.
And I think confidence is a confusing thing and a very difficult thing to instill and teach your child, especially girls, especially in today's society, in a healthy, and if you're a person of faith, a godly and Christian way, because there's confidence and then there's pride and then there's ego, and how to be a confident, strong person who has their faith and is confident in their God. That's something that really, by having Bree, you have this much larger, bigger creature, but as they say, as C.S. Lewis says, well, he's not tame, but he's good. Like, that horse had a mind of his own. Like, your horse is in Parker walking Main Street again. Like, he was so good.
Gentle horse.
So
I just remember when we first got him, and actually we got him from BJ Prayman, who was one of our teachers at True North.
Which, BJ, if you're watching, please send me any info you have on him, because I'm trying to recollect it.
When we had first had him that summer, Ethan was, I think, 4 or 5, and he was just out hanging out with Bree, walked under him, which I saw from afar, was like, oh my God. Bree did not even flinch. He just was the most gentle, kind horse, and a little bit older, and so he probably didn't care anymore. He's just like, life goes on, right? Yeah. But that's interesting you say that Bree had such an important part to play in building your confidence, because I do think
huge.
Yeah.
He was like a 6.5 hand. He was we have a 15 hand, all of 15 hands, and that was before he gained weight. Of course, he was much taller than our guy. Much taller. Right. Like, he was a big dude.
He was a big horse, but super gentle. And I forgot about that. And we've had a dog for years, and the dog that we had at that point was your dog.
We got Ursa. We had Diamond at that point. We got Ursa in January of 2009.
Right. But I do think, both of those dogs, Ursa in particular, but Diamond too, she was super protective of the kids, and part of it was her breed, but she was just like, you're my people. Yep. And so that, I think pets really can bring.
I think that year she stopped because she would wander. She was an Akita, and she would kind of wander and bring back deer heads and anything from field dressing from the hunters. That year, I don't remember her wandering at all that year. Like, she was pretty much, she stayed at the house.
Yeah.
And I think I also think, that you're asking about homeschooling. I think us having the ability to be out on an acreage or property, or having that place where we can walk in nature. Like, I know one of the big clip terms now is grounding, barefoot. Yeah. I grew up barefoot. And I know Derek we call him a hobbit because he was barefoot all, except for winter, but all year long. Like, that's just, that's what you did. And when you're homeschooling, you're able to think about things, or you're taught to think about things logically, like, oh, not why, God, why, as I was joking earlier, but more of, okay, this did happen, so now what's the next steps after that?
What's the
next step? This is kind of a bump or a hole that we're in, but how do we cling to Christ and crawl out of that? and take this as an experience to move forward and learn from that, and as Mary did, hide these things in our hearts and then continue on with life, because life doesn't stop even at death. And I think a lot of people do forget that life, you become alive at death. When you have a near-death experience or an experience where you're pulled out of death, whichever of those, I joke too, and this is very private, and I'm a very private person, so if you come at me, I won't, no one, but I've always told Tony, like, life is precious to me because I feel like I'm indebted. Like, I should not, and that's where, my faith with Christ comes in as well. Like, you're indebted to Christ because he died for you, but I'm indebted because I'm on borrowed time anyway. And I know, Mom, you've talked about that as well. Like, I shouldn't be walking at least. I remember my neurosurgeon coming in and going, well, you're alive, right? Yeah. Now my knee is too. He goes, good. That means you're alive. Pain's a good thing. That means you're breathing. Like, you shouldn't be walking. Yeah. You should not be someone that I've done surgery on. Yeah. And having that, being told that at 14, I know a lot of people will be a snowflake and like, oh my gosh, like, can't say that to a kid, but it's such a reality check for how fragile life is and how, you can make plans. I know a lot of plans for me, my plans in life, like I had plans to go into the military, and that was not going to happen at that point. I had a commanding officer actually go, you're crazy. I cannot talk to you anymore. Not you're crazy, but like, I can't legally do anything. Like, we couldn't even write you a script because it's head injury. Yeah. Like, you can make your plans all you want as a person, but at the end of the day, it's life. I mean, yeah. You cling on to your people, you cling on to the faith that you had, you cling on to your conviction, and you just got to keep pushing forward because
yeah. I think it's interesting that you mentioned about going into the military, because you had talked about going into the military from the time you were like 8. Yeah. Like, that was a plan.
That was my plan.
Your dad was in the military, and so it wasn't foreign to you or to our family at all. That was your plan.
I was in shape. I watched my shape.
You were in great shape. Always been super athletic and coordinated and all those things. And that was a complete derailment, because there was no way you're missing part of your skull. You are not going in the military. You're not deployable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
they couldn't even accept me as inactive. It's a head injury. He said, you're a liability.
Right. Exactly.
You're not in the military. You're a weapon. So,
right.
It's counterproductive.
That actually did skew a little bit of high school, because that had been your plan. That was your goal. And I think in some ways you felt a little untethered by that. Like,
I did.
What do you do and where do you go now? And cosmetology school sounds really different than the military. Let's be honest.
You want to talk about different types of people?
Different types of people.
That could be a whole other podcast. If a kid wants to go to beauty school.
Yeah.
There's a type that goes to beauty school. There's good people, but it's not military type of people.
It's not military. And our family tends to be a little intellectual. We're big readers. You're a big reader. We love to talk about history and theology and philosophy and all those kind of things. And you went into the trades and you were really good at it. You were, you chose to leave that to get married and have kids, and homeschool, like, all the kudos from this end, right? Although I still do miss your cutting my hair. I'm going to be
on here too much. Don't get a big head, but
I'm going to just keep throwing that out there. Okay. But I do think when you have a derailment, you said this in the last podcast that we did together, give yourself grace. And I think that's really an important lesson, is that you didn't take a year to get over not going in the military. It was a multi-year grieving process of what you thought your life would be and what you planned on and prepared for. And then it wasn't even like, if you work harder, you'll get it. You weren't getting it.
No, it was a hard closed door. And I know, because I was going to go in and then get nursing school paid off. Well, then I tried going to nursing school in, was it 2008? And I got I got a scholarship to go to a really great school. And I was like going to do the accelerated program. Well, I worked in a nursing home and one of the patients had TB. Yep. And I have latent TB, which is just where, you go on a year, 12 months of antibiotics. You have to check in with the health department every year after that. and you have TB cells. So basically, since you can't test out of having TB, it became very dicey for that particular school and other schools, any school that I've looked at, for going into the nursing program, because I shouldn't be a carrier. It's not rare, but it's not common either.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And that's an interesting point too, because you kept trying to pivot. I just did a whole thing of pivoting last month.
That way.
I know. And isn't it
Yeah.
interesting how God just kept making these hard pivots for you? And I don't want to say you're hard-headed, so it had to be hard, because I believe God is really a good God. Like he's not teasing us, you know what I mean?
No.
But I think I'm the same way. I get it in my head. I'm focused, I'm hyper-focused, and I get it
Hyper-focused,
done. But sometimes God just has to go, hard stop, you're not going there.
yeah.
Because I have something different for you. I have something better for you.
Yeah.
And I have something better for you for other people, like say Tony, your husband, you know what I
Exactly.
mean? And if you'd gone those other routes, who knows if you on it anyway.
I wouldn't have met Tony probably, because he's a tradesman. He works in automotive. At that point, I would have gone to school and been in the military, probably stationed overseas if I had had my way, because a little bit of adrenaline isn't a bad thing. And I went on a horse that I never met before, bareback. Like, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been a totally different story. And God does know the plans that He has for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you.
Right.
Plans to give you hope in a future.
Yeah.
And when you have total control, you're not willing to let go.
Yeah.
I think you have to be lenient. You have to give yourself grace. You have to either give yourself grace or something's gonna snap. Like, you can't. It's a pressure cooker system.
Right. And you took a couple years to get over that. It wasn't a like, oh, I get it, no problem. It was even a couple years later, you were like, but I had planned this, like and
Yep.
So I think giving yourself grace to grieve too, because that head injury, it could have killed you and it didn't, but it's also permanent in your life. It's part of who you are now. And so that determines some things for you. And that grieving, and like we all have stuff in our life like that, where something happens out of our control, or our stupidity, or whatever, a combination of both, and we have to live with it. And it's okay to cry. Something really helpful somebody told me right after the accident was, they asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm doing great. My kids are alive. And I burst into tears. And he said, you had a near miss. And it's okay to grieve that, because I think sometimes when you have near misses, the terrible thing didn't happen, but it could have. And, it's okay to just cry and grieve what might have happened, because our brains, we just need to tell our brains it didn't happen. It's okay. My girl's here. And even this is like 15 years later, and I'm still getting choked up about it. I think I will, till the day I die, get choked up about it.
Because I think if I can bring a little bit of like, I always got kind of mad when I was little. I don't know if Dad remembers. I used to get mad that, well, why didn't Frodo fall into the fire, like at Cause of Doom? Like, he lost his finger. I think that was a near miss. Yeah. And I think Tolkien does talk about that later. Like, he had that for the rest of his life. He carried that with him. Same with Gollum. Like, he carried that with him for the rest of their life. And those are two differences of, well, at the end of the day, are you going to wallow in your self-pity and, well, it should have, could have, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. You're eventually going to snap. Like, or are you going to be like Frodo and like, moving on, being very intentional about your grace, the grace that you extend others, the grace that Christ extends to you, and very intentional about, you're human.
Yeah.
I'm human, you're human, we're all human. And like, living with humans is hard. And being human, it sucks sometimes, and we're very fallible and we're very temporary in our humanity. And there's I think some peace in that, but it's that near miss that would have, should have, could have, and it almost happened. You got by the skin of your teeth.
Yeah. And we've, and like you said, I mean, we had a house fire, we lost 90% of what we owned. Your husband lost part of his finger in a freak accident, totally not his fault. These things continue to happen in life. And so I mean, I think that's why it's so important to, just like you said, go back to, we have a creator who is a good God, who looks at us with mercy and grace
Yeah.
and says, okay, that did happen. I have this beautiful plan for you.
Yeah.
It's not a but, like that happened, but it's a, that happened. I have a beautiful plan for you.
And
Yeah.
semicolon.
It's an
You know,
it's a both and. Yeah. It's
yeah.
not a, oh, that happened, so we're gonna go to plan B. And I think about that with you in the head injury. I mean, if you'd gone in the military, your life would have been completely different.
Totally different.
And as a result, our lives would be completely different. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But God is saying, this happened, and I have this over here for you.
I think too, like, I think he goes, if I can, it kind of jump into, I think it's, I think about, the Garden of Gethsemane, or Mary and Joseph. And I think about Mary and Joseph a lot. Like Tony and I, we're, if I can say, we're Catholic. He and I have we conversate a lot. Like, I'm very steeply rooted in a Hebraic standpoint of looking at the Bible and Christianity. And Tony's very historically grounded. And so we have a lot of conversations about Mary and Joseph. And when things happen, when bad things happen, there's nothing you can do about it. I hear God saying, this happened to you and this is bad. And I have a plan for you. And now you can not compare yourself, but now you can put yourself into the shoes of, say, John the Beloved more, or Mary and Joseph, or Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, who's going, but do I have to take this cup? Like, do I have to? Why does it have to be me? Right. And God is going, well, do you love me? Do you love me? And really grasping that, yes, you love God. You can grieve that. Mary and Joseph grieved that. Mary and Joseph knew. I mean, like, obviously he raised the Son of God. There's no way that he didn't have some inkling that this wasn't going to go the way he wanted it to. Right. Yeah. Like, he probably looked at Jesus and goes, you're a really strong leader type person, but you're defiant because you went to the temple when I was told you not to. Mm-hmm. Like, that was probably a hint. Like, he's kind of going to take an unconventional route here. Like, and really putting yourself into someone else's shoes. And I say, when something happens, it makes you more human, because you're able to feel more deeply. You're able to clue into that, like, oh, this is what it feels like to cry blood. This is what it feels like to sweat profusely to the point that your core is going, God has a plan, and it's beautiful and it's good. And it's not going to be what you thought at all. But you can really put yourself into the shoes of the people that were closest to Christ. Right. And that's really, I don't know, I really cling to that.
It's a gift.
It's a huge gift. Pain is a huge gift.
As you become closer to the Lord, you get to experience more joy and more of the suffering. That's what it is on this side. Exactly. And like you said, dying is it's when the real things start happening. So, but I'm glad you're on this side for a little bit more, babe.
Too. For better or for worse. We'll see what other trouble we can get into.
So I thank you, Kendra, for just joining me and telling this story. I don't think we've really talked about this whole piece of our life in this way intentionally, maybe ever. So I love hearing your part of it. And you have always been really steady. You're an adrenaline junkie, but you're a steady person in your faith. And that you've always told that story about, you knew God was with you during that whole accident.
I had no doubt. I mean, Sam asked the other day if I can take a little longer. He goes, but Mom, how do we know God is? And all I can say is, I don't know what your story is. I don't know what pains you're going to have, what experiences you're going to have, what hardships you're going to have, or what goodness you're going to have. But I know, as far as where I'm at, I felt God with me. I knew he was holding me. And I know if you cling on to him, he will never leave you. Like, he will never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He has you written in the palm of his hand. Your name is ever before him. And he knew you in your mother's womb. That's just not, God put a name on you. Take it or leave it, Yeah.
And even if you leave it, it's still a truth. It's still
a truth. And even if you leave it, you can still come back and go, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Right. Right. That's the great thing about God is mercy and grace. He's the perfect
Exactly.
combination. Kendra, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, you guys, thanks for joining us for another podcast, another YouTube. And again, Kendra, I love you. And we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks, everybody.